when we talk about the population debate, and when we are talking about especially myths around population explosion, we move away from the real questions in front of us. And the real question today that we should be asking is, what is the road ahead in terms of investing in our young population? It's not something that we need to chase. What we need to chase is development. So development is really the best contraceptive.
Hi, you're watching Hindustan Times, and I'm Aditi Prasad. India is set to overtake China to become the most populous country in the world by the middle of this year. In another couple of months, that should happen. Our population is expected to reach 1.4286 billion at that time. So, why is this happening? Of course, our fertility rates are very high, but also because China's birth rate, which had the dubious distinction of being really at the top in terms of the demographics and the population, has gone down and plunged last year. Last year's China's population actually shrunk for the first time since 1961. And of course, the population continues to grow at the pace it is growing. I'm joined by Sanghamitra Singh, who's lead policy and programs at the Population Foundation of India, to understand how this population explosion actually impacts us. Sanghamitra, welcome to the show. And I want to start off with a with a quick question that is on half the half of this population's mouth probably, that this looks like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, of course, we're talking about claiming the demographic dividend, which sort of comes great, which actually reaped great rewards for China in the last decade with their population. And others, of course, are going. Others, of course, are going, oh my God, most population nation. That means more mouths to feed, more pressure on our economy, on our society, and hence a big burden for India. How would you see this dichotomy playing out?
Aditi, I think it's a bit of both. I think we have a huge advantage and an opportunity ahead of us in the form of this demographic dividend. An average Indian today is 28 years of age, which means that we have this very, very bright young population. If we make the right kind of investments in our young people today in terms of their health, skilling, education, and employment opportunities, we can truly leverage this demographic dividend going forward. And of course, large population numbers, they do put pressures on the environment. And there have been several comparisons that have been made between population and climate change. But it is also true that developing countries, they contribute much less in terms of carbon footprint to the world than developed countries. So I think that's also a very, very important factor that we must remember when we make these comparisons. It's important to focus on the positive at this point.
I want you to explain these numbers to the average viewer. India has not had a census since 2011. It was supposed to happen in 2021. Then COVID happened. Now census may happen next year, may not happen, who knows. In the meanwhile, without any solid official numbers to back this data, how accurate is the UN report? Have we already reached that number? And can you make sense of those numbers for us?
So I think the UN report very clearly qualifies that it's very, very difficult to pinpoint a specific date and say that this is when India will overtake China. These are projections after all, and estimates are made on the basis of data, which is national data, which is available. And yes, the census 2021 has been delayed due to the pandemic, so that's definitely there. What we do know is that Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, when they conducted the National Family Health Survey, the fifth round of it, for the period of 2019-21, it very, very clearly stated that India has attained replacement level fertility. What that means is that on an average, an Indian woman today, an Indian woman of reproductive age group, has 2 children. Now, the moment any nation achieves replacement level fertility, what that does is you begin the process of stabilizing your population. So that process has commenced in India. What has not happened is the fact that we still have interstate and interregional variations in the country. So certain parts of the country still have high fertility rates than others. The reason behind the growing numbers in India, growing absolute numbers, is because we have a very, very large young population base. So the moment any nation has a very large young population base, even if on an average a couple has two children, the population will continue to increase up until a certain point when it stabilizes. This is known as population momentum. And I don't think we've reached a point where we should be alarmed. I think we don't need to have this very alarmist attitude towards the growing numbers. We are undergoing this increase in absolute numbers due to, like I explained, population momentum, and our population will stabilize in due course of time.
Demographic dividends can be reaped only if education and skilling are in the right direction. Really, it's no longer the era of manual labor that without education, without the right skilling, we will be able to reap that demographic dividend. Uh, so there is a gap that needs to be filled. We need to be then heading in the right direction. Are we in that direction?
If we look at the progress that the country has made in the last 10, 15 years in the form of various health and development indicators, yes, of course, there has been progress. We've witnessed a decline in infant mortality, maternal mortality. More women today use contraception. More women today are going or completing secondary school education. There are definitely more women in the country who have bank accounts today. Digital penetration in the country has increased, and that has also opened up newer job opportunities. However, much needs to be done. Like you're rightly saying, we have a long journey ahead of us, and there are several challenges which continue to persist. In the form of inequitable access to health services, education. There are so many social determinants which continue to plague our society even today. India still contributes to one fourth of child brides in the world. Patriarchy. I mean, there are so many factors which we are still struggling with. But what is important is that in the when we talk about the population debate, and when we are talking about especially myths around population explosion, we move away from the real questions in front of us. And the real question today that we should be asking is what is the road ahead in terms of investing in our young population? And how do we do this? How do we continue to stabilize our population while keeping the interests of women at the center of all the policies and programs that are designed by the government?
Okay. And so I'm going to talk to you about. So, what I'm hearing you say is that we definitely need to make the right kind of investments as far as education and skilling is concerned in order to take advantage of that demographic dividend that we now seem to have or seem to be at the cusp of. However, before we started the show, you also spoke about gender dividend. Given that women form 50% of this population that we're talking about, a success of being actually able to harness this demographic dividend also would probably depend on the kind of investment that we are able to make on this um, uh, section of the population, the women force.
Right. The UN report, it very nicely describes how women bear the brunt of any policy changes pertaining to population trends and discourses in various countries. And it talks about how countries have they put the burden of having more children on women when the fertility is declining, and they try to control the fertility of women when fertility is seemingly high. And this is basically an extension of the prevalent, I would say, inequalities, gender-based inequalities, and just lack of respect for women's bodily autonomy, and basically the fact that women are not really at the center of the way policies and programs are designed. When we talk about investing in the gender dividend, women form 50% of our population today, and we can't really leverage the demographic dividend going forward if you're not designing targeted programs which have the interest of women at the center. When we talk about the gender dividend, we need to ensure that women are empowered enough to be able to take their own decisions, whether it is delaying their own age at marriage, whether it is completing secondary school education, whether it is going to college, uh, whether it is about having children and not having children for that matter. And this can really be done if there are greater investments in gender equality initiatives, which not just focus on women, but also on society in general, on men around them. And in the Indian context, we've specifically seen that the social fabric, it really dictates a woman's life trajectory. And that is something that we really need to work on, changing social norms, which will truly empower women and elevate their position in society. One other point that I would like to add over here is that I'd like to talk about female workforce participation rates also. And if we look at India's numbers, India has one of the lowest female workforce participation rates in the world. And majority of women today, they work in the informal sector. Women drop out of the workforce a lot due to several burdens which are put on them, whether it's the caregiving burden or just the responsibility of families. And it's very, very important that we work on norm change and norm shift, because unless we are really doing that, it's going to be very difficult for us to truly realize gender equality the way we want to.
Okay. To appreciate these numbers, I would also like to talk to you about the skew in population growth in different parts of the country, which you briefly mentioned before. Now, as I understand it, the North Indian states uh, like UP and Bihar having a very high fertility rate, so a larger population explosion there, versus the South Indian states where population is almost not growing. It's at a negligible growth rate. How does this, can you sort of help us understand how this, population distribution is happening? Because that eventually will have a big impact on our, not just on our societal fabric, but also in terms of economic inequalities between states.
Right. So it's not fair to view fertility indicators in isolation. Um, uh, Unless there are other developmental indicators which are which are seemingly doing well in a particular state or region, it is impossible for fertility rates to be low. So if we look at, I mean, you took the example of UP and Bihar. It's not just the fertility indicators which, I mean, it's not just the TFR which is high, the total fertility rate which is high. Uh, it's other indicators like women's access to contraceptives, unmet need for family planning is very high, education levels are relatively low. As compared to that, if we look at the South Indian states, access to health services, literacy rates, employment rates, all these parameters are good. These states are doing really well on all these parameters, and with investments in health and development and education, fertility decline is a natural phenomenon. It's not something that we need to chase. What we need to chase is development. So development is really the best contraceptive.
Development is actually the way, and that's a beautiful line to end this conversation with. But as we just pointed out, viewers, there is a skew between the North Indian states and the South Indian states as far as population growth is concerned. And whenever the next delimitation exercise comes about, it might just have the biggest impact on politics also. So this population explosion, or uh, this sort of moniker that we've received of the most populous country in the world, replacing China as that, is not does not just have economic and social implications, but might even end up having political ramifications. Where, let's say, the state of UP, with a much larger population, already sends 80 MPs to the parliament, may end up sending twice that number in the near future. But thank you for watching this broadcast. Thank you, Sanghamitra, for joining us
Thank you,
and
Aditi.
breaking this down for our viewers. Keep Stay tuned to Hindustan Times. We will keep getting you more informative analysis pieces as we go along.